Welcome to Ruger Tech Tips. I'm going to show you today how to disassemble your Ruger Wrangler revolvers. I have both a standard Wrangler and a Super Wrangler, and we're going to take this apart and show you how to disassemble it. Now, before we begin, a couple tools you're going to need. A ball peen hammer. You're going to need a driver that uses a number 10 Torx bit, or a standard screwdriver, a non-marring small diameter punch, or just using a brass punch, a 1/16 punch, some type of disassembly tool, and this is just a small pin. You could use a finishing nail, would work, and of course a pair of safety glasses. So before I work on my Wrangler, I want to make sure that there's no live ammunition in my revolver. So I've got my spare cylinder here. I've checked that for live ammunition. I can open the gate up and rotate the cylinder, and I can check every chamber to make sure that it is empty. I've got my standard Wrangler here. I'm going to check this as well. I'm going to open the gate, rotate the cylinder, and make sure that there's no live ammunition in that. So just going to set that to one side. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to depress my base pin latch here on the bottom. And from the shooting position, this goes from left to right. So I'm going to roll it over my hand. I depress that, and I can pull my base pin forward, and I can remove the base pin, and I can set that aside. That now allows me to take the cylinder up and out. So I'll set that aside. The next step is I need to get the grips off. So I'm going to use just a standard flat blade screwdriver into the grip, and I'm just going to unscrew that grip screw, remove the grip screw, and then remove both grips. Sometimes it's easier just to tip those to one side and push out the grips. I can set those aside. I need to close the gate. I need to point the revolver upward and bring this to a full cock position. And what that's going to do is it's going to expose my strut on my mainspring, and you'll notice there's a little hole in that strut. I'm going to use my disassembly pin. I'm going to insert that inside that hole partially. I tend to do it from the left to right. It does not matter. And I leave it proud on the left-hand side. So pull the trigger, hammer goes forward, and now I've captured all the tension of my mainspring on there. The reason I do it in this position is if for whatever reason this came out by being proud on the left-hand side, I know which way it goes back in. So I got an indicator there. I can tell which way to put it back in if it happens to come out. We don't necessarily need to take it out, but if it does come out, you now have a way to check that. There are 5 screws on our Wrangler, 2 at the back, 2 at the bottom, and 1 at the front. These 2 at the rear are the same screw. They're the same length, same thread, everything is the same with these. These 2 are different from each other and everything else, and this screw here in the front is again different. So we have 3 different screws of the 5. The only 2 that are identical are the 2 at the rear. So we need to keep track of all the screws. So I'm going to start at the bottom next to my trigger guard, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to start unscrewing my screws. Once you get that screw out, you'll notice on this screw it's fairly long. We have a threaded portion and a long shank on the end of it. This is the longest screw in the Wrangler. And what this does is it goes through my hammer pivot and it holds the hammer pivot in place. I tend to like whatever hole that came out of, when I reassemble it, put it back in that same hole, because it will keep that hammer pivot centered, just same way it came out of the factory. So since this came out of the non-gate side, when I reassemble it, I want to go back into that non-gate side. So I've kept track of it. This other one is going to be similar to that, but not have the long shaft on it. So this other screw onto the other side. So this screw, when I take this out, is going to be similar to that one, but a little bit shorter. You can see the difference here. It's close to the same size, just a little bit shorter. I'm now going to move to the back. I'm going to take out my 2 screws. These 2 are identical. So it's just a matter of unscrewing this. So that's 1 screw. Be careful of making contact with your back strap on your frame. You don't want to hit that. You could even put a piece of tape across that to keep that from getting marred up. So there's my 2 screws that are identical. And I'm going to hold this all together. There's a little bit of spring tension on the grip frame, So I'm going to keep that, I'll keep my thumb inside there to compress that and hold those two together when I take out this last screw. This screw is going to be the shortest. It is only slightly shorter than the two identical screws, so I'll keep that separate. The way to separate our grip frame from our frame is I have to pull the hammer back and I'm going to pull down into the rear to separate these two halves. So I'm going to pull the hammer back slightly, tip that back, and separate the two halves. My mainspring will come out, and there's a small spring and plunger here that may also come out. So I'm just going to separate that out. So it's a little tiny guy. I'm done with my grip frame. On the back of the grip frame, there's a small spring and plunger. It's just above the left grip frame screw hole. I'm going to pull that out and remove it and set that to one side. Once I have all that, now all I have left to do is take out my two pivots. The pivot that goes through my trigger and my cylinder latch, it also holds down my gate spring. So it actually sits in a little relief cut, which is what holds the pivot in place. So I need to get under that so I can drive that through. So I'm going to use a 1/16 punch. I'm going to get underneath the pivot and keep my gate spring down. So I'm going to put my punch underneath that to compress it. And then from the far side, you want to go, if this was in the shooting position, you'd go to left to right. But with it upside down like this, it's reverse. And I'm going to use a non-marring punch, and I'm going to drive that through. I'm going to hit it a couple times to start it, then I need to remove my punch. In doing this, sometimes it's easier to put a screwdriver through our window here. It gives me something to pound against when I drive this through. Usually I'll start with a couple of good hits. You get it started, and then I can pull my 1/16 punch out and drive that through the rest of the way. So you can drive that pin all the way through, set that to one side. You can remove the punch, and then you can also push out the base pin. The base pin usually just slides straight on through. Set my screwdriver on one side. Once you've done that, now you're ready to remove the entire action out of the revolver. You can lift it out, you can just flip it over, dump it upside down. It's all going to come out at once. So you have multiple pieces. So I can lift my hammer and trigger. On the hammer, I have the pawl. That's going to come out, and I can separate those two. The trigger comes out with the transfer bar. The cylinder latch and the gate spring come out together. The gate comes out, and down inside, which fell out, there's a little piece that is your pawl guide that guides your pawl up through. And that's it on disassembly of your Wrangler. Pretty much for all your cleaning, maintenance, that's as far as you need to go. Now, on cleaning your Wrangler, if you go to our single action cleaning videos under the tech tip videos, we'll explain all how to clean your Wrangler revolver. So thank you for watching this Ruger tech tip.